Hi, one of the big Oscar contenders this year, in a film I was very much looking forward to seeing, was Licorice Pizza, the latest film from Paul Thomas Anderson. He's had an exceptional run of films since his debut Hard Eight, also known as Sydney, in the mid 90s, followed by Boogie Nights, Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, um, There Will Be Blood, Master, Inherent Vice, Phantom Thread, and now this film. And most of his previous films I thought were exceptional pieces of work, films of the year in one or two cases. But Licorice Pizza I found to be very disappointing, and I think his least engaging and least interesting film since Hard Eight. It's the story of a young man who is formerly a child actor, now somewhat aging out of the child acting bracket and failing to make the transition to adult roles, who, with the assistance of a young woman with whom he's clearly infatuated, starts up a series of small time businesses in Los Angeles to prepare for the next stage of his career, assisted by his business manager, who is also his mother. And these um, businesses are selling waterbeds or opening the first pinball arcade in California after it's legalized again after 30 years. The film's story is very slight. It's much more of a character piece, a nostalgia piece, although it's much more soft pedaled on the nostalgia than something like Quentin Tarantino, who fetishizes nostalgia continuously. Here, it's the setting, and it's not over egged at all. It's just this is the setting in which we find ourselves. There are a number of interesting and engaging sequences. There's the whole section where they have to deliver a waterbed to John Peters, who at the time was the hairdresser to the stars and boyfriend of Barbara Streisand. He's played in the film by Bradley Cooper. But he appears as this extremely intense, peculiar, eccentric figure who intimidates our main character Gary and hits on his girlfriend or would-be girlfriend Alana. Um, but the film has so little substance that this three-scene cameo really sticks out. Um, Gary, played by Cooper Hoffman, is not a particularly interesting or engaging person. He has very little of a story arc or journey over the course of the film. And Cooper Hoffman, son of Philip Seymour Hoffman, who plays him, is not a particularly great actor. He fails to give him much in the way of nuance or inner life. Alana Haim, in contrast, who has no acting experience at all but is a singer with her family group, is much stronger, much more engaging, gives a sense that there's a lot going on that we don't see under the surface. And as a result, is much more of, I would say, the lead character because you feel much more that what she's feeling and thinking than what Gary is. Sean Penn also has a three-scene cameo as a fictional, over-the-hill Hollywood actor um, who's trying to show off his or what's left of his virility. Um, and there are bits here and there that are interesting. There's a sequence where, due to the petrol crisis which is going on in the background of much of the film, they have to drive in reverse down a hill in a truck late at night, in which the closest thing we get to an action scene in any of Addison's films. Um, but it just doesn't cohere into anything. It's a very shaggy, unfocused, unstructured jumble. Um, it's it's the first of his films that I've seen on release that I wouldn't recommend. It's, I think, showing a worrying tendency in Hollywood now that a lot of the older generation of directors, of which Anderson is, I think, in the youngest bracket, are now making films about their youth, making these nostalgic projects, and believe them to be extremely interesting and engaging for the public. Um, because we have this, we have Kenneth Branagh's Belfast, a film about which I genuinely don't care. And Steven Spielberg has shot a film called The Fablemans coming out at the end of this year, again about his youth growing up in Arizona. None of these things interest me. I don't know why they would be particularly engaging. Spielberg did not have a particularly unusual or remarkable upbringing, although it is something that shaped him clearly. Branagh's story, I read a synopsis. It's very much sort of rote stuff, not saying or doing anything particularly interesting or groundbreaking that I'm aware of, although I'll inevitably have to watch it because it's had incredible reviews from people who like that sort of thing. But as I said when I reviewed Minari about a year ago, every life is important, but not every biography is worth reading. And a biography like this, not an autobiography of Paul Thomas Anderson, but actually one of a friend of his who did go through many of the stories that happened in the movie. This is not a structured story. It's just a bunch of anecdotes jumbled together without any real thought or coherence. And having seen the trailers and the clips in the end credits, there does seem to be an awful lot of material that was cut in order to shrink it down. More scenes with John Peters, for example, going berserk at a petrol station. I mean, Peters was a bizarre character who would go on to be a film producer and then studio executive before running Columbia Pictures into the ground in about 1990. Later famously having an obsession when he was in charge of the Superman movies of trying to get him to fight a giant spider, which led to Wild Wild West, which features a giant mechanical spider played by Kenneth Branagh. Everything joins together. But this is, if this is the shrunk down, focused version of what was going on originally, what happened to the director who made Magnolia, which was 3.25 hours, had 7 or 8 storylines, but everything worked together and intermingled and worked in harmony? This has 2 main characters, and it's a jumble and it's a mess. The acting is adequate at worst. The production itself is very good, but the writing is not good enough. And from Paul Thomas Anderson, this is shocking.